Good evening, those of us in the room and all of you online. My name is Dave. I am currently the president of Wake Audubon. So if you have any questions or want to chat about how to be more involved, feel free to find me after the meeting. I'm going to start with a few announcements. So the first is we have events coming up. The best way to find out what's going on with us is to find us on Meetup and look at our Meetup page. We have bird walks coming up at the Williamson Nature Preserve, Durant Nature Preserve, Bass Lake, and Hilltop Needmore. And the Williamson Nature Preserve walk is the second Friday of every month. And I just wanted to remind people we do that in partnership with the Triangle Land Conservancy, and you can also register on their site. The next one's July 12th. Then in July, we have two other events, opportunities for observations and to learn about banding. Both are at Prairie Ridge. The first one is on July 20th. And last month's speaker, Susan Campbell, will be demonstrating banding with ruby-throated hummingbirds, which is also our bird of the year this year. And then the following Saturday, July 27th, tonight's speaker, John Gerwin, will be doing a demonstration of banding with songbirds, also at Prairie Ridge. And those start in the morning to try and get it done before it gets too hot. So, and then in August, we have a few events coming up as well. We will have two opportunities related to butterflies. One is a butterfly walk that John Gerwin and John Connors will lead. That's on August 10th. And 2 days before that, we have an annual butterfly count that we support. And we're looking for folks to go out with the two Johns to learn more about how to do the identification so that we can start thinking about how to pass the torch in future years. So it's a great opportunity to learn more about the ID of the butterflies in our area. John, do you want to say anything more about that?
So we've been doing this count like 20 years now, and John Connors and I aren't getting any younger, so it'd be really good to have some folks with us. If nothing else, it's hot out there, and we're always ready to fall over and faint. We need somebody to pick us up and take us home and hydrate us. It is a good time to come on out. We'll go over, it's an easy walking and learning about how to do a butterfly count. It's a lot like a bird count. We're just doing butterflies, so it'd be great. Just mention on the walk, we start at Ralston Arboretum, and then I usually peel off after a couple hours, go to Prairie Ridge. That's also super easy. All ages. We've had people bring their kids in strollers and stuff because it's flat, easy walking. So encourage everybody to come on out, either one.
All right. Thank you, John. And so then my other announcement is about the upcoming next month's program meeting in August. It's our annual potluck. We'll be here, but we'll start an hour earlier at 6:30. And if you haven't been to our potluck before, it's an opportunity where we share photos from the last year and give people a chance to tell some stories related to their photos. Each person can submit up to 5 photos. Is that right, John? Yep. Members and non-members are welcome. Just like any of our meetings, it's open to the public. And so if you're interested in submitting photos, we're asking you to send them to Missy. We'll put her email address in the Zoom chat for those of you online. And for those of you in the room, you can find it in the member meeting and meetup or when we send out our newsletter for August. So start thinking about if you have some photos you want to share and what you would say about them. Anything else on that, John? I know you said you wanted to make sure we...
Oh, yeah. We always invite people to say a few words. You don't have to, but you can, like for each of your photos. Usually there's a little story. That's part of the reason for doing this, to share stories. It's not a contest. I really want to stress that whatever photo you have that you want to share, that's what we're about. There are obviously some really good photographers in the group, but that's not what this is about. You might have a cell phone, a picture, and it's a little far away, but if it shows what you're trying to show and get the point across, then share the story. That's what it's about. That's why we have the potluck dinner, to get together and share some time and share some stories. So we encourage you to do it. Years ago, when the pandemic hit, we did a hybrid meeting potluck. It was a little challenging. We stopped doing that for a couple of years. I'm thinking now we know better how to do it. Now I might resurrect that. We're still thinking about that. We got time to plan. But I encourage you to come on down to the museum. But I know some of you might not make it, but we'd still like to, see some of your photos if you want to send them in. If you are, Missy would like her photos, like them about by 4 days before. I think it's August 13th is the meeting, so by the 8th or 9th. If you're a little bit later, you can send them to me. I'll take them. So my name is, I'm the backup, and our emails are on the website in the calendar.
Thanks, John. All right. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about our conservation work. So there was a recent meeting of the Growth and Natural Resources Committee here in the city of Raleigh. And we put the call out to get some people to show up for that, to advocate on behalf of the plan and strategy for trees in the city. And so I just wanted to thank people who showed up for that on short notice. As a result of the meeting, the city council approved unanimously 2 things. One is the development of a tree conservation plan by their Sustainability, Wildlife, and Urban Trees Committee. That's part of the Park Advisories Board. And approved an effort to work more with the staff to explore incentives to support tree conservation and protection in the community. So I use this as just like an entree, as a way of saying we're having volunteer opportunities for conservation coming up all the time, whether it's showing up for a meeting or helping out with the stream cleanup or all kinds of things to do. And so if you're interested in doing more volunteering with our conservation group, you can contact Mary Abrams. We'll drop her email in the chat, and Mary is in the room. Mary, can you raise your hand? You can find Mary after the meeting. Tell her what you'd be interested in doing, and we can find a way that you can help out. And along that way, Mary, I will note, is filling in temporarily as the leader of that conservation committee. So if you're interested in taking a leadership role in the conservation committee, let us know as well. And then lastly, with our conservation group, we are currently working on exploring starting a habitat certification program. So if you're interested in helping people make their yards more bird friendly and want to think about what that kind of program could look like, let us know. We need help thinking through and designing it and think about how to implement it. And then lastly, I'll end with, do we have any first timers in the room joining us for the first time this evening and brave enough to raise their hand? All right. Well, we have something that we do for people who are here for the first time. If you're interested, we will cover the cost of your membership for the first year. That includes membership in both the Wake Audubon and also the National Audubon Society. So you get the glossy magazine and all the benefits of being an Audubon member. And so if you're interested in that, you can find Jerry. Jerry's right here, and she'll get you the form and we'll get you signed up. With that, even though you've already heard from John a couple times already, I'm going to have Jeff come up and formally introduce Jeff Gerwin, our speaker for tonight, who is one of our own. Thanks, Jeff.
I'm going to informally introduce him. John doesn't need an introduction to almost every one of you have known him for a long time, but I've probably known him longer than anybody else here. 36 or 37 years, I think. John, of course, is a curator of birds here. Before that, he was collections manager, and got promoted to curator when Dave Lee, the late Dave Lee, the last curator, left some years ago. He's been on the Wake Audubon board for many years and been treasurer for many years. Now he's still serving as assistant treasurer. So he's probably spoken to our group about as many times as anyone has. I know a lot of things about John, but I'm not going to tell you the best ones. John got his bachelor's degree from University of Minnesota. That's way up north in 1985, I think it was. And then 2 years later, he went down to the other end of the country and down Baton Rouge way and got a master's from Louisiana State University. Came here in November of 1987, I think it was. And he's done a lot of different bird research, a lot of real basic stuff, natural history and life cycle research. He's worked with a lot of specific species: hummingbirds, golden winged warblers, Swainson's warblers, painted buntings, hummingbirds, sapsuckers, hermit thrushes, several others. Does a lot of work in the Uaris, mist netting and banding birds there. A lot of work for years has worked there, and he's talked on that topic before. Tonight, he's going to talk about molt in birds. I don't know how much time you spend thinking about bird feathers, but feathers are just incredible structures. They're the most complex structure that's ever been derived from the vertebrate integument, and birds are always growing feathers and replacing them. And you can learn so much about a bird from its molt pattern, how old it is, the time of year, what its health is. At least once a year, I get somebody send me a picture of a cardinal with about half its feathers molted and say, "What's wrong with this? Has he got a disease?" And I can just imagine how many of those Gerwin gets every year. What's wrong with this cardinal? You know, but we're going to learn a lot about feather patterns tonight. So take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Fire up the screen. I might even use this, an additional microphone. And I know I've got to, where's my share screen? Hello? I'm not seeing, oh, there it is. There. How do I get rid of that thing? There. We are getting good at this. That should do it. All right. Well, I don't think I'm going to need this too much. I'm holding up, and I forgot to show the folks online, but you can believe me when I tell you that I'm holding up the wing of a Chuck-Will's widow, and it's molting. The reason I'm showing you that is that we don't actually know the full molt of a Chuck-Will's widow yet. And so, in talking about tonight, so I'm going to go over some of what we know, and there's so much I could go over, there's a lot that I won't. Colleagues at the Institute of Bird Populations do bird bander training, and molt is a big part of why we do that. And Peter Powell is one of the folks who's been a big mover and shaker in the world of studying molt and collating other studies and getting it out there for people. And so I've taken some of the information tonight from webinars that I've attended of theirs and publications. And the big impetus was that over the years, over the last, I don't know, 10 years, Bob Overfelder just sends me photos all the time of crazy looking birds. And he's like, "What is wrong with this bird?" And so we had lots of discussions about these are molting birds. And I thought I should just do a talk. So, but here we go. And I got a few other photos here that I'll share. This is the book that we use when we're out banding feathers. Peter's compilation of stuff. A couple of folks in the audience here up from the Greenville Bird Club, they were just at one of the training sessions in Minnesota for 8 days. I'm sure you got very familiar with the Powell Guide. And then just lots of publications that these folks have been involved with, so Peter and Steve Howe, again, out at IVP. Why birds molt for various reasons. One, of course, is and to get into breeding plumage. But not all birds will change when they go into breeding plumage. So some are monomorphic, like these birds, they will still molt, but you wouldn't necessarily know it unless you took a closer look. When some birds change, when their plumage changes, it's dietary. So these two house finches, the one on the left is eating a little bit better. I'm not going to be talking about this. Same thing with pink birds like flamingos and spoonbill. That's a dietary thing. Others like blackbirds, it's a change from feather wear. They molt in the late summer and fall. On the left is a red wing, on the right is a rusty. And when those feather edges wear off, the bird actually gets blacker by late winter, early spring. I'd like to point out that the feathers grow, and I'm going to be mostly talking about songbirds. So they're growing in feather tracks. That diagram on the left shows you, it's like little train tracks across the skin of a bird. The feathers grow in these tracks, and then they overlap one another like shingles. So they're not just all over the bird's skin. Unless you're a duck. Ducks are a little different, but a lot of birds, no, it's these feather tracks. And then on the right, it's just showing you, and maybe my little arrow here will work on the computer, yeah. So the primary feathers, we look at those a lot. Those are the flight feathers as well as the secondaries. Those are growing out of the bird's hand and arm bones. The primaries grow out of the bird's hand bones. The secondaries grow out of the ulna bone. Above that, I just want to point out the PP cove. That's primary covert. Those are covering the primary, the base of the primary. We call them primary coverts. We use that a lot in our aging criteria. I'm going to be going over that. And we compare them to these called the greater coverts, which are the greater secondary coverts. So there's going to be a little bit of detail that I have to go through before I get to pictures of birds that are around our area. And I'm going to focus more on the local, like Piedmont birds. So there's 6 types of feathers. We're just going to be talking about the contour feathers. Those are body feathers, and the flight feathers are on the wing and the tail. And I didn't point this out, but on this back diagram, those covert feathers up above, even though they're on the wing, they're considered body feathers. The primary and secondary and tail feather, those are the flight feathers. It's just the definition. So what is molting? Well, to me, it's just these birds are changing their clothes. I mean, in its basic form, but there's a lot going on underneath, of course. It's a physiological thing, it's under genetic control. So there's the endogenous, there's metabolism, you can get into a lot of scientific jargon about it. And then again, there's things about it we still don't fully understand. When we talk about molt, a lot of this came about from Europeans who first studied it, and then it came over into the US. And so we thought about it, no surprise, from that northern aspect. And then we coupled it with birds' life cycle processes. So we would talk about breeding, post-breeding molt, and non-breeding. But then, of course, we expanded our view and realized that that doesn't work when I go to Nicaragua and I'm doing projects down there and studying local birds and talking to my local colleagues. They're like, I'm like, what? Okay, what's this bird doing that? You tell us. I mean, it's your system, but it doesn't work. And so that's part of what I'll be showing tonight. We've changed some of the terminology, so it's broader view, because there are 1,000 birds in the U.S. There's 8,000 birds in tropical countries. More and more studies are understanding how feather evolution took place, and Jeff mentioned how complex it is as an integumentary thing. So we're now understanding more about where it's evolved from reptiles, from dinosaurs, getting different perspectives. Here's some papers that came out in the recent past. You can see in lower right that, again, Peter Powell was part of that, just looking at new evidence in terms of Archaeopteryx. So some new stuff we're still trying to understand. We now identify 4 basic types of molt, and of those, I'm mostly looking at the second one when I talk about the birds later on. It's mostly what we call the complex basic strategy. If you hang around a bird banding demo, you might hear us talk like this, and it's it can sound a little bit strange, all these different words. Some of those are old, no longer used, a lot of them still are, and this is only part of the list. but I'm gonna simplify it here. This is a nice little graphic that was done by one of the colleagues out at IBP when they put together one of the recent papers on molt and the evolution of molt across the bird family. This is the tree of life for birds. One thing to note is that I said I would probably talk more about the complex basic strategy. That's the light purple one, the lilac one. You can see it has evolved through a lot of different bird groups. But the other thing to note is that something like the yellow is over on the left. But then if you look real close on the kind of on the bottom right, there's the lilac, it goes to green, where the gall is, then it's yellow, and then it's red. Those are different molt strategies have evolved across that lineage. And then the point is that some of these features have evolved several times across birds. So I'm not gonna have time for a lot of things, but I just want to point that out. There's a lot of different ways that birds do what they do. And I thought about, okay, I could pick one of each and go through that, but then I thought, I decided just really, I'm gonna go into birds that we see in our neighborhoods or when we're out. If you're out on one of Earl's trips and seeing birds, that's when I'm gonna show you some of those species and how they do what they do. But if you look at over on the lower right of that tail of that rufous hummingbird, Missy captured one that's molting and one of its little tail feathers. I'm not gonna be able to talk about all these birds and a few others. So just to start, this is the kind of stuff that Bob would send me. I actually got the photo on the left, and that guy, but Bob got these others and would ask me, you know, what's going on. So these are young birds, and we'll come back to this at the end. But how do these develop? How is the molt now? How do we envision it? What do we know about it? How do we describe it? So these are two baby birds, and I think you can tell that one on the left is just out of the nest. So he's just a couple days, maybe just a day out of the nest. The tail hasn't just started, and the bird on the right has been out of the nest probably 2 weeks. That's a common yellow throat on the right. The one on the left looks like maybe a bunting or a cowbird. They're so similar at that stage. This is what we call juvenile plumage, and it's those feathers are weak, and they've served their purpose, and these birds need to now make a change. And that used to be something we would call a post-juvenile molt, but that was turned out to be a little bit confusing. We've also called it first pre-basic. It still is. It's bird's first basic molt. By that, we just mean going into its first sort of adult-like plumage. But it turned out to be not quite accurate in terms of evolutionary terms and physiology. We call it the preformative molt now. It's a unique first cycle molt. When that baby bird gets out of the nest within a month, it's going to start this preformative molt. And then after that, it will do molts that are what we would think of as adult molts or basic molts. And so this is just, and there's some things that happen during this molt that allow us to look at the age of the bird, one of which is it's an incomplete molt. And we use that incompleteness to compare feathers, and I'll be showing you examples of that. So most of the birds that around here are pretty much, we think maybe all birds do a preformative molt. It's early in life. Again, it's within 4 to 8 weeks. So birds that I've studied, when we see babies come off, those nestlings come out of the nest, it's usually within 4 weeks. They are initiating that first molt. They've got, the juvenile feathers are low quality. Again, they serve their purpose in the nest. They got the bird out of the nest, and it's time to get on with the rest of their lives. So they've got to get some higher quality feathers. But just note that they will then wear those feathers for 12 to 14 months. And so let's look at that real quick, some of the details. So let's say we're in May and June of every year, you lay eggs. A lot of birds, small songbirds, are going to incubate for 2 weeks. The nestlings are going to be in the nest for 10 to 14 days, and that's their juvenile plumage. And then they get out of the nest, they're a fledgling, and within a month or so, they will do their first molt, the preformative molt, and they will acquire their first basic plumage. So now it's July or August. They will wear those feathers through the fall. If they're a migrant bird, they will migrate. They will spend the winter with it. They will spend next spring. They may breed when they come back. They may not. Some of the first year birds don't breed, but some do. And then at that point, again, now it's 12 to 14 months later, they will molt again. So here is a young bird. And they, when they do their pre-formative molt, it's just body feathers. So this young bird is out of the nest. The tail feathers are fully formed, the wing feathers, the flight feathers are fully formed, and it's going to maintain those for that first year. But the body feathers are what's molting. And of course, birds don't read the book. They don't follow directions. So I said that it's all body feather. Well, sometimes they'll throw in a few wing or tail feathers. We don't know why. Sometimes the central tail feathers they will molt. A young bird will molt those. We don't know why, but they will. But not all of any given species. So never easy. But noticing those feathers in the circle. You can see the pin feathers here. Those are those greater secondaries, and they're molting. These are the primary coverts. They are not molting. They're older. These are now growing in. They're newer. This might take this bird a couple of weeks to grow these in. So these feathers, by virtue of being a little bit older and not molting, they look different, and they usually look more worn in due time. So those are the things that we're looking at on these birds when we capture them, and we're tagging them, and we're assessing it to build a kind of demographic table of ages in the population of, wherever we are. So after that preformative molt, again, they will then get into a cycle of adult molting. Most birds only do one molt a year, so that cycle is just an annual molt. So a bird like this one's an warbler, you can see it looks pretty bedraggled there, a lot of pin feathers on the wing there. This bird is undergoing its annual, what we call a pre-basic molt into a basic plumage. But there are a few birds that will do 2 molts a year. So they'll do a basic molt, but then they'll do a pre-alternate molt in the late winter into a, quote, breeding plumage. And we'll look at a few birds at the end that do that. And when they do an alternate plumage, it's not a full molt. When they do the pre-basic molt as an adult, it's everything. It's the flight feathers, the body feathers. It's your cardinal with the skin head, and I didn't even put the cardinal in here because I get so many pictures of cardinals every year. But there's some other related birds that we'll look at. So just to reiterate, you got the preformative molt. After that, when a bird lives its first year of life, if it does, it comes back, it's going to undergo these annual pre-basic molts, and that's what a lot of birds do. Some will do a limited pre-alternate molt. Like swamp sparrows do a little bit. The scarlet tanager, which we'll look at the end, they do a pre-alternate molt. This is a painted bunting that is this is a young male painted bunting that is he's now about 14 months old, 15 months old, and he is undergoing his second pre-basic into that adult plumage that we all love to see when we see a male painted bunting in its full regalia, green and blue and red. But you can see his head is starting to get the blue, and there's a few red feathers coming in. Woodpeckers, I'm not really going to talk about woodpeckers much. I just want to point out that what Peter and his colleagues have been doing lately is studying not just specimens. They do borrow a lot of specimens to look at these birds, but they also are now getting great photographs from all these banding operations, or just great digital photographs from what Bob sends. And they're getting a lot of interesting stuff. And they've noticed that woodpeckers actually retain different generations each time they molt. And so they have found that some of the birds will, like this pileated woodpecker or some sapsuckers they figured out how to tell a generation 1 and a generation 2 and a 3, and sometimes a bird will have 3 generations of feathers on its body. And so in some banding operations you can tell. So here's a sapsucker, a typical adult female sapsucker, and there's a picture of the primary cohorts, and that's a pretty standard looking bird. You can see it's a pretty uniform color, dark charcoal gray, and it blends in with all the other feathers. It doesn't stand out. But every now and then, earlier this year, we caught one, and I hope you can see that those feathers right there, they do stand out. Those 3 in the middle are brown. They're very different. And we know now from having compiled enough information that this is a bird that's 2 years old. We say it's in its 3rd year, but that just means it's a 2-year-old bird, depending on when you caught it. It might be a little over 2 or a little under, but this bird was about 2 years old, and we can tell it by looking at those primary coverts that are different color. Raptors, I'm also not going to say much, but I just want to point out a couple of things. One, I'm down on the coast giving a program a couple of years ago, and I happened to, it was late July, and I look up one afternoon, I had a couple hours before my talk, and these kites are flying over. Mississippi and swallowtail, they're migrating, bunches of them. So I got a point and shoot camera, and I'm hard to take photos of a bird and focus flying with a point and shoot, but this one came out pretty good. You can see it's molting. So you can count backward. There's the outer primaries. We count backwards from the outside in, and if you do that, and I'll do it with the arrow online, that's about the 5th primary. So that's kind of cool. You can put stuff like this, if you take photos and put them into UBird, people like folks at IBP can take a look at those things and compile that information and keep piecing it together, because there's still things about the molts that we're trying to learn, some of the timing and other things. And then on the right is a red-tailed hawk that was in molt before it was hit by a car. And you can see the outer 3 primaries are pretty brown, and they look different from the inner ones that are gray. But if you look at the secondaries down here, there's a couple that are molting in, but it's not as uniform, and that's a typical pattern of birds. The primaries molt in a nice stepwise fashion, uniformly out, but the secondaries is kind of bounced around. We'll see that again in a couple of birds. And then I just want to point out, here's a bird that landed in my backyard earlier this year. So I do what I do. I take photos through a dirty kitchen window, but still it comes out okay. And look at the tail. Look down at those little white spots. What those are partially grown tail feathers in. So I can see that this bird is in molt. And then I look close and I can see that one outer tail feather is actually kind of brown. And you may not believe me, but I'll show you. It's true. So here's what it would look like up close. This is not the same bird. This is another bird brought in, but this is how it is with raptors. You know, all these young birds are brown and streaky. They hold that plumage for a couple of years. They molt. So we call a bird like this a subadult. So here it's acquiring that slaty gray plumage that we're familiar with on an adult. Here you can see this primary was growing in. These have not molted yet when this bird hit a window and was brought to the museum. And so we save a lot of spread wings like this for people to study as well. But I'm going to come back to my bird in my backyard and zoom in and show you that you can see those tail feathers have not grown in, and you can now see that's pretty brown. So this bird's molting, the tail's about done. And if you look up here, to me this is brownish, and that makes sense because it's probably just about to finish the wing molt. They typically get about this far before they start the tail molt. So it would have been about done when this tail was well in the molt. So there's just some of the patterns and things that we see in these birds. And again, if you're taking photos, you can put these things into eBird and people can use them. So typically the wait a minute, what's it? Let me get rid of that. There we go. So the wing molt is what we call centripetal. And typical is that it starts in the middle here and goes outward. Most birds will have 10 primaries. Some of the songbirds have 9 primary. This particular bird would be 10. We count backwards and we give these all a number. And if we're writing down what they're doing in the hand when we're banding them like this bird, we would count backwards from here and say that like this looks like number 6, 9, 8, 7, 6. Oh, it's actually 4, 3, 2, and 1. So we would make notes on our data sheet about that. You can also see that here's a case where the primary coverts on both birds are really tapered. They're really worn looking, different color. Now, these are younger birds. We use the tail too. The tail takes on a different shape after the bird undergoes its second pre-basic. So that's an older bird that would be older than 14 months. So here's a thrush. They get this pretty broad, almost S-shaped pattern, whereas a younger bird is more tapered. And usually they show some wear and tear, especially when they've done a migration, come back the next spring, they're going to look like this orchard oil. Now this one feather grew, and like I said, sometimes they don't follow the directions, they just decide to molt one feather. But by and large, you can see that most of these are pretty worn, and that's the whole pattern. So we use the primary coverts a lot. So, I talked about that a lot. We use it to age these birds. We're, again, interested in knowing how many young young birds versus how many adults are in, say, a given population, or how much productivity there was in a given year when we're doing our banding operation. So here's a bird that's showing the brown primary covert. The difference is that if this were even though it's blue, it's a 1-year-old bird. If it were a 2-year-old bird, these would have all this blue edging like these greater coverts would. So in other words, it'd be uniform. This bird over here, it is actually uniform. I know it's hard to tell because it's an all brown bird, but if this were a younger bird, these would actually look a little bit different. So the one on the left, the 1-year-old, the one on the right is greater than 1-year-old. We don't know how much greater because at that point we can't tell by plumage. So we're going to do some birds. Does anybody know what this bird is? Anybody want to guess? Maybe you already know. I'm sure Jeff knows. You can't say. You can holler out if you want. This is a bird. Beside the cardinal, this is one of the birds that probably have had more questions and phone calls and emails about, and people thinking it's a new species. Because no matter how hard they look in the field guide online, they can't find an example of it. So this is a young bird. It is just, starting that preformative molt. You can see some of the little reddish brown, I'll say. It's got some black coming in on the back, the tail is black. So I'll give you a hint. Now when this bird finishes the molt, it's going to look like this. So this is an eastern towhee, and all these sparrows have these spots. I brought some specimens up here. There's some sparrows up front that you can take a look at. They will not look like anything you're familiar with. They're the chicken sparrow and the field sparrow. And sitting next to a baby scarlet tanager, none of them looks like anything you've ever seen because they don't have that plumage for very long and they try to stay hidden. But this bird is molting, and when it finishes, it'll look like this, and you can see the primary coverts are this dusky color, different from the greater coverts, and so we know that's a 1-year-old or less than a year-old bird. Here's some more pictures from Bob. You probably know what this is, but can you see the look on its face, the molt that's going on here? A lot of pin feathers here, a lot of pin feathers here. Any guesses? It is a parula. So here's what it's going to look like once it's finished the molt. So it's a northern parula. Okay, those are easy. Now what is this? If you can tell me what this is, I'll give you $10. Okay, 15. My final offer. Is it a blue jay? No. Is it a warbler? Is it a crow? Is it a thrush? What group is it in? All right, let's take a look. Bob has been busy again. This is mine. This is a little baby, probably 4 days out of the nest before it flew into one of my nests. But here's some of what Bob got. These are slightly older. Same species, slightly older. You can see they've begun this preformative molt. They're now getting rid of the juvenile plumage right here. It's starting to get a few yellow feathers in. This bird's got a few more in the back, more in the belly, starting to show a little bit more color all over, even the head. Any thoughts? All right, you need more hints, right? All right. So there's some more shots. So this is a bird that's now almost finished with that preformative molt. The yellow has really grown in. A lot more here. It's got the greater coverts finishing up. The tail is grown out and all yellow. This looks like an adult actually doing a pretty basic molt, and it dropped its whole tail. It looks like sometimes they do that. But this bird's got a lot more yellow and already got the olive on the back and such. I think it's probably an adult. Anyway, now you know what it is. It is not quite. Look, it's over on. Yeah. So this is a 1-year-old, essentially a 1-year-old male. So when they molt that first time, they get a little bit of this olive wash in their head. The next time they molt, when they do the second pre-basic, then he comes back and says, a male will come back, it will be all yellow, all golden yellow. The black and white warbler, I think everybody knows this one. When they molt, they molt on the breeding ground, but not all birds do. Some birds will migrate some distance and do a molt, and some birds will migrate all the way to where they're going and molt. So we'll just compare a few examples, but this is what's interesting about the different species and what they're doing is that this is a bird that comes back early in the spring and it starts nesting early. I have found fledgling black and white warblers in the Uaris on May 7th. So that means they had to get started by early April. And then just last month we were out banding, it was mid-June, and we caught a male and he was molting everywhere, tail, wing, body, an adult male who had already had bred, I'm sure, and then was like, I've done my job, I'm out of here. I'm gonna molt and go. Now some black and whites will surely breed again, but some don't. And water thrushes are that way too. The Louisiana water thrush, they come early, they breed, and they start molting in June, and then in July we start catching migrants heading south in July. So there are different timing that the birds are doing on a different timeline. And so the bird on the right you can see is undergoing that's a wing molt. So this is a bird that does not molt on the breeding ground. So and flycatchers do some of each. So this wood pewee, this is a juvenile. These juvenile feathers are pretty diagnostic because they get that edging that to me it reminds me of the scalloped potato, all that buffy edging. And then some of that will molt out or wear out. But as adults, and this is a mix, the bird on the upper left looks like the adult, the one in the bottom of the wing out looks like a young bird, but the one on the adults, they will migrate, and eastern wood pewees go to South America for the most part, and they go there and then they molt. So it's interesting that they would fly with worn feathers. When they come, when a bird does that, and here's another bird that does that, a willow. I put in quotes because willow and alders look alike, and we take some measurements and we can often figure them out. I haven't yet on these birds, but they're two different birds that were caught in May. We know that willow alder fly, they migrate south and they do their molting down on the wintering ground. When the bird comes back in May, just looking at those birds, especially the one on the right, you can see how shiny those feathers are. I mean, they're in quite good condition for a May bird. If that were a young of last year, if that were one of those 1-year-old birds, remember they're really warm plumage by then. They look very different. So we can tell by these feather conditions and knowing what we know about a bird's cycle, what age they are. So the Canadian flycatcher does it differently though. The Canadian flycatcher, when that bird on the left, that adult bird there, is finished breeding, it will then molt on the breeding grounds. If you've ever wondered what a Canadian flycatcher looks like, there's one on the right. So again, it's got this scallop-looking buffy edge to the feathers on the head and the back the way that pewee did. So that's a juvenile Acadian that will continue its preformative molt. It's starting to grow in those back feathers and head feathers, and it'll soon look a little bit more like the bird on the left. But again, the adults, when they do their second and third and fourth pre-basic, they do it on the breeding grounds. So it's a mix, and Pittenacks do a mixture. And this was interesting because back in December, a couple of years ago in December, one year, we were out in the Uaris banding, and we caught 2 flycatchers from out west. The first one was a western flycatcher, and that was easier to tell because they looked like a yellow-bellied. And then this one was brought in, and I thought, well, it's either a Hammond's or a gray flycatcher. And then over time, I was able to, with different measurements and features, figure it out. But you know, it's interesting to see a bird like this show up. What I was really hoping to do is use a molt pattern and plumage, and hoping that the 2 species were on a different cycle, but they're not. They both will migrate and then molt. So then I thought, well, that's fine. The bird is migrated, and then I realized, well, I'm in December. It is winter now. So anyway, the bird has got a pretty fresh plumage, which I can show you this. You can tell by those, especially the tail feathers, those are in really good shape. And the shape of those is more like an adult. And these are too. But you can also tell that it's a pretty small bird. You can tell by when it sits in my thumb here and forefinger and in my hand, that's a pretty dainty bird. The gray flycatcher is noticeably bigger. And so anyway, that and a couple other features like the gray on the head and the belly, that turned out to be a hen flycatcher. Quite unusual, but you know, that was the year of all the fires out west, and it was odd that we had two. One on Friday and this one on Saturday, and it may have had something to do with all these fires. So the purple martin is one of our project birds here at Lake Audubon. As some of you came out, we abandoned nestlings every year with Prairie Ridge and at the faculty club over at NC State. This year was a good year. You know, we've had a couple of rough years, but this year we tagged 193 nestlings. And here you can see a couple of those birds that are abandoned. And the reason I show these is that because of that cycle of molt and the way martins do it, when they do their preformative molt, they look, you know, that bird on the left is a female, the bird on the right is a male. These are still adults. So we can tell that they're a 1-year-old bird. So when they come back and I see the tag on their foot, what I do is I do 1 foot for one site and 1 foot on the other, but then the next year I reverse it. And so that way, because I can only do it for 1 year at a time, but that way, every subsequent year, if I get a photo of a color banded bird, I know which pond it came from. So for example, this year we had a couple of birds. We had one in Holly Springs show up and it came from the faculty club. We had a couple in Durham show up that came from the faculty club. We recently got a photo of a bird in Florida, and I don't know if that's one of ours. I think people in Connecticut might be using some red as well, but I don't know. I'm trying to find that out. But that bird, if it's one of ours, it came from Prairie Ridge. So anyway, we're able to use the features of their plumage and their molt cycle along with this little banding strategy, just to understand a little bit about which nestlings survive and which come back. Most nestlings don't survive their first year, but if they do and they're coming back, it's just kind of interesting to know. So what about the adults molting? Some of them will start on the breeding ground. They will suspend the molt. They will then migrate and finish on the wintering grounds, but some have been shown to do their complete entire molt, their pretty basic molt on the breeding grounds. So I thought I'd have a little fun with Missy's photo. I love this photo. I'm just trying to, I want to put it in our newsletter and have people put captions to it. We have a contest. All right, there's some birds that do what we call delayed plumage maturation. That just means when they do their preformative and it looks like it's a female-like plumage, and then they have to do for a second pre-basic before they're males before they acquire an adult-like plumage, or the plumage we think of like when we see a painted bunting or this American redstart. So we'll look at a few of those. So here's a redstart. On the right is the adult female. I think of that as lemon yellow. On the left, it's an orangey or peachy color, and it's late in the afternoon. My camera definitely casts a little bit of orangey light on it, but I assure you we will hold that bird, and especially under the wing, that patch under the wing is very much like a cantaloupe color. I think about food all the time, so all my colors are related to food. And then when that young male, that bird on the left, so that's this guy, so he'll come back next year. So it's in the fall, he'll come back in the spring, he might mate, he might not get a mate, but then he will undergo it at about 14 months of age, he will undergo his second pre-basic and he'll acquire the black and orange plumage. So the indigo and the painted buntings do similar stuff. But both of them do some pretty complex stuff. And I get a little bleary-eyed because when we do indigo buntings, it just seems like they're molting all the time. The bird on your left is that same young bird. We saw a picture of this before. So it's a male, but it's a 1-year-old male. It's got the primary coats that are dusky. The bird on the right has all this blue edging in it. That's what an adult older bunting, one older than 14 months old, looks like. But what these buntings do, both painted indigo and some of the others, is sometimes the young bird, before it does its preformative molt, so it's got a juvenile plumage, it needs to molt, it does something, it does a molt. It's not a preformative molt. and we don't know why. And it's an incomplete partial thing, so we call it an auxiliary molt, but it's pre-preformative. And sometimes they'll do that real quick. It might only take a couple weeks, it's not always, but not many feathers. And then they will turn right around and go to the preformative molt. It's a lot of energy to molt. So it's surprising that they would, expend that much energy, and nobody's really, to my knowledge, come up with a good reason why they would do that. What pressures and what in their evolutionary history has been doing that. So again, you could have a pre-juvenile, a bird might do a pre-juvenile molt, an auxiliary preformative molt, and a preformative molt, all before it is 6 months old. And again, this is a bird in the fall, it's more of an adult, but just to show you that we just see a lot of this where they're molting all the time when they come through in the fall. And the young birds can be molting. They can be molting a lot, they can be molting a little bit. And it gets very confusing when we're out there banding and it's on September and we start getting all these migrating buntings coming through. Then the males do a pre-alternate. So they molt in the fall. There's a blue bird and it molts into that female like plumage, like this bird on the right. And then in the late winter, he will do what's called a pre-alternate molt back into that blue plumage. Painted bunnies don't do that. Once they acquire that male gets that blue head and green and red and all that, once they got it, they keep it. But indigos and blue grosbeaks, they change out. Well, not the indigo. They change back into this brown plumage. So that's a pre-alternate. So the painted buntings, there's an adult female. And if you've wondered what her nestling looks like, there it is. And that bird, mostly juvenile, and it'll need to molt some of those. And when it does, it'll look a little more green, like the female after it's preformative molt. When the males do their preformative, so just to show you again, there's the primary covert, they're dusky, that's a young male. This is a 1-year-old bird. Again, we say it's in its 2nd year. They sometimes get these little blue spots on their head. Here's one that got it on its neck. It's real variable. It might only be 1 or 2 feathers, might be a lot more. But that's the bird. That bird comes back. It may or may not breed. It seems to reduce aggression from other males. So these males that look like a female seem to be able to slip in and out of the population or do what they do without as much aggression from the older males. And sometimes they will breed. We had some telemetry buntings years ago. We did a couple of young males, and one of them did end up with a female all spring and summer. And then sometimes these birds do something that we call eccentric, where they're doing a preformative molt. And I told you that it's body feathers, it's not flight feathers, but sometimes birds will do some flight feathers. And again, I don't think we're sure why they would do it. This bird looks like one of those birds. It's bringing in a few primaries, and it's usually not all of them, it's just some of the primaries. And when they do that, they typically do not molt the primary coverts, and so these look all uniform. It looks as if this bird is just slipping in a few primaries, and then the greater coverts are coming in the way any young bird doing a preformative molt would do, but those primaries are different. We can use that with a few birds. I'll show you one in a minute. But anyway, then again, the buntings, once they've undergone their live for a year, and then they come back, and then they're going to do their next molt. They're pretty basic, so the males are going to then acquire this plumage, and they will retain that for the rest of their life. Anytime they molt, they do not go back into any kind of female like plumage. And here's a female undergoing a basic molt. You can see these primary coverts are more like the primary itself. They've molted along with it, a sign of a pre-basic molt. So the orchard oil does the same thing. It has a delayed plumage, and it also, they do molt migration. I did not mention that the painted bunting is a western population. There's a southeast population. The birds out west tend to do a molt migration. I don't think we know exactly what the birds in the east do, but the ones out west have been looked at a little bit more. The orchard oil, same kind of thing out in the Midwest. western states, these birds do a molt, do a migration for a short distance, and then they molt, and then they keep going. The other thing they have found with orchard oriole is that there were some tag birds that they found left the U.S., went to Mexico, and then bred again. Only three species have been found to do that. These guys also don't stay long. They come in April, they get going in May, they do what they do, and by late July, you'd be hard pressed to find an orchard oriole in North Carolina, or at least in the Piedmont. They're gone on our banding site, and they're already by late July, they are gone. So there's an adult female on the left, adult male on the right. This is a baby, so it's been out of the nest maybe a week. It will undergo some molting. If it's a male, it does a preformative molt. A young male will acquire this black throat. You've probably seen these birds out there. So again, this is about a 1-year-old. If this were in the fall and spring, it would be a 1-year-old bird. You get the black throat, you get that chestnut on the crown. Now these birds also do a little bit of eccentric stuff. Sometimes they'll replace some tail feathers down here or throw in a couple of black primaries. And then, but if we spread the wing, we can see that same pattern on the primary coverts. Even if we didn't see the black throat, we know it's a younger bird again, a year later, it's a 1-year-old bird. And then it will into its 14th, 15th month old, and then it will start its second pre-basic, and then it will become that rusty orange and black male. Tanagers, they often begin, after they're done breeding, they will begin on the breeding ground, but they might finish somewhere else. So we'll look at some close-ups. I think everybody recognizes the female on the left, the male on the right. That male is an older male, so that bird has undergone at least 2 molts. Because before that, when they have just done one, they can look like this. You've probably seen these pied, splotchy tanagers out there. But again, you can see the primary coverts on the left that different from the greater coverts, that pattern again, dusky and different. So there seems to be some hormonal influence too on these birds and why they get this. I don't know the full details. I just heard about this recently. But again, some more research is going on into this. Scarlet tanagers have a lot going on. Bless their hearts. So come up and take a look at this baby. It's actually even more gray than this one. This one been out of the nest a few weeks, so it's just started its preformative. When it finishes, it's going to look like this female. If it's a male, it might look more like this. It will migrate south and go to South America. It will then do a pre-alternate molt that will look like this. Come back, will come back. And then when it leaves, it will molt again like this, back into a basic plumage. It will then do a second pre-basic, or that is the second pre-basic, then it will do another pre-alternate, and later on, they tend to get a little bit redder as they get older. So they're busy birds. Oddly enough, we caught a couple last year in the middle of the meadow, but you might see a little red on the face of that bird there on the right, that they were eating blackberries and pokeberries, which is good fruit. A lot of these birds switch to fruit in the fall and winter, including woodpeckers. But anyway, this is a bird that looks like it pretty much finished the preformative. It might have a little bit more to go, but it looks like it's going to be a male. A lot of black here. All right, we're finishing up. A couple more and we're done. But you have to tell me what they said. $20 if you can tell me what that is. Okay, 30. It's my final one. Is that what group is it in? Is it a bird? Is it a reptile? Is it a frog? All right, that's a little baby out of the nest, not long. Maybe 3 or 4 days out of the nest. I'll give you a big clue, big hint. All right. So they got a little older now. So they're doing this preformative molt here on the right, it's just about finished. Still got a lot of gray, but it's got a lot more yellow. The one on the left is pretty much finished. Look at that tail though. Look at how ratty looking that thing is. I told you they're all fresh and new. There's something about this species. They don't behave like the other birds. I don't know what they're doing, but the tails, even when they're young, can look so bad. But now you know what it is. Maybe the chat, yellow-breasted chat. All right, there you go.
Hey, in the chat, Megan says she wants her $30. She called it.
She did? No way. I owe her. All right, I tell her to send me her PayPal account. I'm always getting myself in trouble. Well, their chats do this eccentric stuff that I mentioned before. I'm kind of thinking that's what this bird is up to. That it's got a few secondaries coming in, and it's got a few primaries growing in. And as I recall, it was a young bird. But that's sometimes what they do. Normally, if they don't, they just have this smooth looking edge to their flight feathers down here, and everybody looks okay after a preformative, but sometimes they don't. Like this one's got this, it's a bit of a gap here, a stepwise thing. And that's another classic clue that when you see this, that they've undergone this what we call eccentric replacement of a few primary feathers that they don't normally do. And that's a clue that it's a young bird versus the adults. Once they hit their second pre-basic, they don't do that anymore. Another thing we might look at is this bird. I'm holding on to this feather. This bird looks super old. It's the kind of thing where we're studying the different feathers on the wing. These look a little bit older too, just to tell us, what the age of that bird is. And there's just, again, a little primary feather grown in along with the greater covers, when in fact, there should not be a primary grown in on this bird, because this is a young bird, I can tell. So that's a bird doing this eccentric molt thing. Oh, I want my $30 back. You know who that is? I got that flesh-colored bill. Got those spots though. All those baby birds have these spots. The one on the right is an adult, just to show you what an adult wing looks like. But the one on the left, that's another baby, just got not long out of the nest. All right, I'll give you a big clue. That's it. So it's a field sparrow. But I hadn't really shown you many adult wing feathers. So I'm talking about all the primary covers with the young bird, but this is how they look. They're real rounded, and usually look pretty fresh. And again, with all that reddish edging, it blends in with the greater colors. So it was a cool thing. One fall, we were out there banding. It was late September. And that's the time of year when we often can't age the bird beyond, it's a young bird or it's an old bird. And it's because they've usually finished the preformative molt, or they've finished their pre-basic adult molt, and there's nothing more we can do. But here we caught some field sparrow that they had not quite finished, so it's kind of cool. You can see, now you can compare what I just showed you, the adult primary cover, rounded, different color, fresher from the young, dusky, tapered, and the same over here, of a young bird. So even though it's September and we're not supposed to be able to age them, we actually could this time, but that's local information. And again, I can submit these photos with the banding lab, because they usually question me when I say something like, this is a bird in its second year, it's a 15, 16-month-old bird. They're like, you can't say that. But I can't because of these photos, because we usually can't. But every now and then, this is what happens. And then tail molt, I didn't say much about it, but it's also like the wing molt. It's centripetal. It starts in the middle and it works its way out. So these central feathers here have completed their molt, they're grown in, but then they're stepwise on the way out. And these have, as you can see, it just kind of got started. They're about 20% grown. Now, every now and then, again, birds don't read the book. So here's a bird that just decided to throw in one feather here and one over here, and it almost looks like it molted this one and the rest are pretty one. And the really odd thing is this is February. They should not at all be molting in February, but every now and then. And the blue grosbeak, male on the left, female on the right. And I think this is the last one. So when the blue grosbeak does it, that preformative, and it's and then it migrates and comes back, and it's about a year old. This is what they look like. So compared to that bird on the left, where it's all blue with that chest of the wing bars, but they don't have any of these splotchy brownish coloration and that sort of thing. That's a younger male. They're the adult again to compare. When you look at their wings, the primary covert, again, typically it's this pattern, but every now and then they will replace some of these just the way the indigo buntings did. So again, over here on the right, you can see it will replace a couple of these, I don't know why, but it's still a young male, still like a 1-year-old bird. And this is how the adult would look. So this is going to be at least 2 years old or more. Uniform, all the feathers have some blue edging, and they just kind of blend in with the rest of the wing. One time we were processing a bird, and my helper said, "Hey, look at this. This is different. There's a weird feather here." So we zoom in, and you can see this is one feather, and then or two. We spread it out. There's one. We spread it out. There are 2 feathers on the inside that are retained. The thing is, notice the bird's body. The bird is all blue. In other words, it's an older bird. It's undergone 2 pre-basic molt. It should not have any of the juvenile feathers left. Again, it's a rare instance where we could actually say it is actually a 2-year-old bird. It's in its going into its 3rd year, which we normally can't do because all those feathers, once they look alike, they're just an older bird. They're just 2 years old, and we can't say. But again, I can send this stuff into the lab and say, yeah, it's true. So who cares? Well, there's a lot going on. We have a lot going on. I hope you see that this is just a part of what is going on. They're raising young, molting. They may migrate. They may not. They may migrate and molt, and then finish migrating and then finish molting. So they're very busy out there, and all the while they're doing this, they're navigating windows and collisions. Their towers are trying to not ingesting plastics. There's free-running cats all over. Vehicles trying to run them over. A couple of birds here that hit windows that were brought into the museum. So the information that we're gathering is, this molt stuff, this life cycle stuff. It just helps us to understand their life history and then inform some of the conservation actions we take. And that's that. My last slide is for you. Now, have you thought about it? You know what species they are? You have 1, 2, 3, and 4. I should have told people you can email me when you're. Any ideas? Is one a Carolina wren? No, unfortunately. I will tell you that this little guy on the upper right is a sparrow. One of Bob's sparrows. He was on Mid-Pines Road. Mary's got her hand up.
Some votes from the chat. House wren for number 1.
There is no house wren in there. Who?
Field sparrow.
No, but it's close. And somebody said vesper, and that's close. Well, it looked like either vesper or grasshopper, but you said you saw some grasshoppers hanging around the bird, I think. And we decided it was grasshopper, but there are vesper sparrows on Mid-Pines Road. That's where he took the photo. So it could be that it was a vesper that was just hanging around some grasshoppers. But you get the point. You saw the field sparrow earlier. You can come up here and see a field and the chipping sparrow up here. They all look alike. This one you might recognize number 4. It's a meadowlark, yeah. Eastern meadowlark, but it is a young one. Doesn't have the black yet. And the brown it's all buffy. This guy running on the ground, running along Mid-Pines Road again. I know that's kind of an unusual one. Yeah?
Says it's a hornbill.
Earl is right. She's been the Bob, probably. Yeah, that's a big juvenile horned lark. So it has not really undergone that preformative molt yet. It will soon, and then it'll look more like a lark. It has not yet. This is a bird that I got lucky with. Whoops. No. There's no fair. No fair. Well, going back to the bottom. I think that's technology. That little guy was one of our, we were studying these birds. I was with some young naturalists up in the mountains studying this bird. And following one of the adults and just happened to flush the brood off the ground. It just probably left the nest that morning. And that's a young hermit thrush. That's how they look. So you might remember robins and bluebirds that have all their spotted chests and spots on the back. Next time you see a robin or a bluebird, take a close look at the babies and you'll see these white spots and on the back and these other spots on their chest. But yeah, it doesn't really look like a hermit thrush, does it? So, all right, so that's really it. That's the fun we had tonight. Thanks for, it went a little longer, but it was just some really interesting things and I was wanting to share that with you. And that's that. I'm going to turn up the lights a little bit if you have any questions. And I couldn't do that. Megan got the other one. It's expensive. Bob?
Yeah, the whole, molting thing, with respect to migration makes no sense to me. I wonder if, the mode of migration makes a difference, so if it flies over water, for instance, most of the time, does that have, some pattern of molting versus a bird that tracks along the coast, in migration?
Bob's asking about the molt migration, that it doesn't seem to make much sense, and is there a pattern in how they migrate, and then how they molt over water, over land. What they have found out west is that what they're doing is they're actually doing these short distance migrations to places with more food resources, because it's an energy intensive thing. So they're going into places along, it's so many dry places out west that they're finding lower watery areas or low areas with insects or fruit where they can really bulk up while they're molting, because it's energy intensive, and then they can bulk up a little bit more so they can continue the migration. So, but birds that go to the water, once they go, they're gone. They're not doing anything while they're flying. And then, most of the birds, you either got shorebirds, raptors, or some warblers go over water. Most of those have probably already been molted on the breeding ground. Now, yeah.
How, does the molting process impact their ability to fly and move, that do they spend a period of time where they're not able to be mobile?
So the question is about impacting their ability to fly during molt. And so that's part of that. There are different strategies in different birds. But if you're a duck, you're flightless. They drop all their flight feathers at one time when they're molting. But and then I didn't talk about the hummingbirds. Their molt is real protracted, and they will start, and it goes on for like 6 months because they're so flight dependent. And then the other thing they do is when they do that centripetal flight feather molt, they start in the middle, and they're going out, and they get out to primary number 8, and then they need to do 9 and 10. They stop, they do number 10, it grows, and they come back and do number 9. And that seems to be related to flight, because that leading edge is pretty important. The Chuck-willed widow, the reason I showed that bird is that up until it's been 20 years now, so I don't know, but I was asked by a fellow who did a lot of molt studies, he's retired now, but he said, you're in the realm of Chuck-willed widows in the southeast, so find all the roadkill you can. If I put the word out, we got a bunch of roadkill. He said, we don't know how they finish primaries 9 and 10. We don't know the order because they stop singing in August when they're finishing and they seem to go somewhere else. Are they doing a molt migration or what? I don't know. Now that we can track birds so easily with these different tags, I'm sure it won't be long. But I went around and we've got probably 40 salvaged birds from different wildlife rehabbers, and Jeff's in the sandals all the time and telling buddies pick up every Chuck little widow off the road. And sure enough, they molt. We got them. We got the wings. Showed their molt. And then it gets to the 8th primary, and that just, well, we don't have any more specimens after that. We have no specimens, so we don't know if they skip number 9 and do 10 and come back, or just what they did. And I don't know if anybody's figured that out yet. But yeah, some of the birds are affected. It definitely is changing their flight dynamics some. But you can see where the Mississippi kite was still able to migrate, even though it was molting, because it wasn't too bad. Jeff?
Is there any bird in the world that doesn't molt once it gets its adult plumage, like, I don't know, kiwi or penguins or something?
Jeff's asking if there is any bird in the world that does not molt once it gets that adult plumage, and I'm not aware of a bird that doesn't molt. That's a good question, but they all wear out eventually. So all those birds are doing things, you know, even the kiwis on the ground a lot, and the penguins on the ground, on the rocks, in the water. So I think over time, and also it's not just wear, like physical wear, but there's solar radiation wear, and they start to get weaker and damaged, and that's another reason they have to be replaced. So I'd be surprised if there were such a bird. Yeah.
You mentioned several times that, you know, it's an energy intensive process. If the food isn't available for whatever reason, drought, whatever, does that delay the migration? Does the bird, is it frightened because the feathers are worn and they're not being replaced?
So the point and question is that it's an energy intensive process. So what happens if they can't get enough food, enough resource? Birds, there are birds that do suspension in their molt, but then typically they're found to pick it up again. But I think the problem is that I don't think we've been able to track enough individual birds to know. But when you see some birds, like some of the shorebirds I see on the coast that shouldn't be there on the coast, and they don't look like they're doing really well plumage-wise, I suspect that they are having trouble finding enough food, and that's why they look like the way they look. But I think with you'd have to track, you know, individual birds. We can pull the data. We pull data on all these studies, and we're like, well, on a population level, some of these birds molt a little bit, and then they stop, and they go somewhere, and then they keep molting again, or they fly somewhere, finish the job. But as far as energy thing, we'd have to do more studies with individual birds and do a correlation. I don't know if anybody's done that, but my guess is they would not. At first they might not molt, but eventually I think hormones or genetics would kick in, and they would just have to start molting. And at that point, it just might be when, you know, not all birds survive, so they may not. Yeah.
John, do I understand? I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So once they have their adult plumage, did I understand you to say that then at that point is when it becomes very difficult to age them?
Yeah, she's asking, is that once they have the adult plumage, it becomes more difficult to age them. And that is basically it. So when they're a juvenile, that's pretty obvious, you know, they're all speckled. Then they do their first, what we call the first basic, now the preformative molt, and they will look like an immature bird. At that point, that's where the terminology can change, becomes an immature. And they could look like an adult at that point, you know, they look like a female typically, you know, that like the common yellow throats, male and female, when they are young and do that preformative molt, they look like a female for the most part. Then they come back the next year, they're now a year old, they still look that way. And then a few months later, they molt again. That's when they get that, what I will call the more adult plumage. I mean, they're adults, but it's sort of their second adult plumage. And at that point, they molt all the feathers. And the reason that we can tell they're young is because the first time they did not molt all the feathers, they did not molt those primary coverts. And there's a few others. So we can see the difference. But when they get to that second time, the second cycle they molt, they molt everything and now everything looks alike. And so when they keep doing that, they just keep looking the same. So for the most part, we cannot, except there were those two instances where I showed you where we just happened to catch a bird that had retained a few juvenile feathers. We happen to know they'll do that one time, but then after that, it seems like from what we've seen in other studies, they don't keep doing that just one time. So for the most part, once it's done the 2 cycles, then yeah, we can't really tell.
And then the banding. Then the whole banding process, like you would-
Yeah, so when the bird has that unique band on it, she's asking now about the band. Yes, when the bird has the band on it, then if we capture it again, yeah, then we can know. And there might be information in the photos we take. One of my many unfinished projects is, find one of these young students, give them a couple $1,000, and I've got thousands of photos, and they're tied to band data, tied to time of year, even the hour. And all of that could be put on the website, onto the Banding Lab site, and people could then have access to it. That there's probably information there that we don't even know how to get to now, but in the future, somebody's gonna figure out how to analyze those photographs in a way we're not able to do right now, but there's something about those photos that later on somebody's gonna go, oh, there's some data there. And we don't have that, we're not there yet, but we have the photo and we have, again, we have the time, the day, and the location, so, yeah. Anything else, or are you ready for cookies? It looks like there's one in the far back corner. Oh, no.
And whether you sometimes see those birds and whether they present with some sort of atypical old pattern, or are they just doing the best they can to replace what they've lost?
Question is about birds that have undergone some trauma, and then what happens? We don't, if it's a minor thing, if it's something minor, then the bird just carries on. So, for example, we inflict some trauma on birds, because we will sometimes take a feather as a sample. When we pull that feather, the body immediately signals that as if it molted, and it will start growing a new feather almost immediately. And we know this from having taken, say, a tail feather. There's some types of analyses people really want a tail feather, and and they said, well, just cut the tip off. And I thought about that. No, I don't want to cut the tip, because then it's not going to molt for a whole year. I'm going to pull it because I know it's going to signal to the bird that it's time to grow back. And sure enough, because we do these studies for like 3 months at a time, if we pull a feather in May, by July, it's almost grown back in. The bird has the hormone signal. And if we had some birds, some of the Swainson's warblers we were studying, they forage on the ground. And they're predators on the ground. We have a lot of black rat snakes around. They fed on some of the nestlings and eggs. Well, a couple of times we catch a bird and it had 2 ages of tail feathers, 1/2, one young and one old. And I'm convinced that's just because they were walking on the ground and either a lizard or a snake or something struck at it and grabbed the tail, and it only got half the tail. And when it pulled half the tail out, and this would have been, say, a 1-year-old bird, but when it pulled the tail out, the body was like, well, time to molt again. I mean, and now it's cycle number 2, and they grew back as an a cycle 2 feather, and they look different from cycle 1. But we literally had these birds that were half and half. And at first, you know, my techs were scratching their head, and I had to think about it for a second. I think, well, what do I call it? You know, but no, it was a young bird. I'm, you know, confident that, and also looking at the wing pattern, a young bird who had half its tail pulled out, and it grew back. So I think as long as they're able to eat, fly, you know, avoid predation, that they're going to recover. If it's pretty severe, then that's a different thing. But so all the only things we've seen are you know, minor like that. That I'm aware of. I think again, if it's really severe, then I you know, then it ends up in a rehab center, and I haven't really asked them what goes on in that case, other than because they start doing a lot of things like trimming the bird, and maybe they have to remove the feathers to get to the skin to get some antiseptic on it, that kind of thing. You know, at that point, there's a lot of intervention by the wildlife rehab people and stuff. They're just, you know, then they're feeding the bird and all that. So. But they do recover. Not all, but they tell me, you know, about 50% can recover from some pretty serious trauma. So, and then they take over because their body kicks in and they start their regular molting. So, yeah. They seem pretty good. Good round of questions and all. Ready for some cookies now?
Let's do it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Anything else you need to say?
Nope, thank you, John. Please stick around, chat, have some snacks in back. And thank you for coming in this evening.
Bye, online friends. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
That was great, John.
Thank you.